everybody. Welcome back to a Taco Tuesday. It's Pastor Jake. This is the 23rd of March, and I am here across the street from where we were, actually across a parking lot from where we were last week at a place, God forgive me, at Tortilleria La Nueva de Zacatecas. And unfortunately I went in supposing that they would have pastor. They actually didn't have pastor, but they had lamb. But really, let's be honest, we're here because they make their own taco, or their own tortillas. So I actually took a picture of the big tortilla maker in there, and it's right here. The place is delightful. Little sort of shop that they sell ice cream and tortillas and all other kind of foods, and they have a little seating area there, but it's great. I'm pretty excited about lamb tacos. I don't know that I've ever had a lamb taco, so we're gonna have at it, and see you in a minute. Okay, so I don't have anything to judge a lamb taco against, so I'm gonna say that was fine. I generally don't like stewed meats in a taco, and that was stewed. I mean, the meat was not dry, it was delightful. I just don't like a wet taco. But here's something interesting. You know how taste and smell are like very tied to memory? I put this hot sauce, the salsa, which was fiery, I tell you, onto the taco, and I had some on my finger and I licked it off, and it was like, wow, 20 years ago I had this very vivid memory so I sang in a choir in high school and in college, but in high school we used to do like a choir tour in the spring, I think, and one year we did sort of a loop. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so we did like this loop, and one of our stops was in Long Island in New York, and one night we had some time to ourselves, and I was like, myself and my buddy, you wouldn't know it these days because I'm so desperately out of practice using Spanish, but I used to love Spanish in high school, and my buddy and I were the kids that like always carried around Spanish and English dictionaries with us just to buff up the old vocab. He actually went on to move to Mexico for several years, but we were always talking in Spanish to each other just to practice, and we thought, oh, this would be a good opportunity to practice Spanish a little bit. We were staying in an area that was largely Hispanic, and we left and went down the street to this little corner store that sold tacos and drinks and things. And I remember we had jarritos, and we sat and watched soccer for a little bit, but they also had tacos that they were selling there, and so we got tacos, and I'm telling you, that salsa that I had 20 years ago was exactly this salsa. Amazing. That, like, I mean, first taste, it was just like, bam, there I was sitting with Lauren in that little taqueria on Long Island. Wow. So, random thing, but speaking of things that are coupled, I just want to spend a minute talking about sort of a follow-on to my sermon on Sunday. I said at the beginning of worship that I felt like I could spend 5 more weeks on this topic of reconciliation, which we've been working through, and I feel like I could have spent 3 just on this week of clearing the path, talking about sort of those things that are systemic, that keep us stumbling back into the same old relational sins. And I used a phrase that has been stuck in my head, that we can disrupt the disruptive patterns in our lives. And I went on to make a larger argument about systems, and I think that that's important, that we are fighting, as Paul says, against the powers and authorities, the sort of the spirit of the time. And to me, we're talking now. I think that translates to our moment now when we're thinking about these larger systems that don't have a face but are powerful in patriarchy and racism and sexism and all these large forces that do shape xenophobia, that homophobia, that shape our world and the way that we are with one another in the world. And I was thinking that yesterday about and discussing with a friend of mine about sort of the interplay between, like, what is our personal responsibility in those larger systems, and how does change happen there? And I don't have a good answer for that, because it's a really complicated web of how that happens, but it certainly happens in community. And I was reminded of again, I think I brought it up a couple months ago maybe, but Malcolm Gladwell's newest book, Talking to Strangers, he has a chapter in there about Sylvia Plath and about her suicide, which she was in England, Great Britain at the time, when she died by suicide. And I was fascinated with this chapter that he had in the book, which was about town gas. It was an extremely popular means of suicide in England, and the suicide rate in the country skyrocketed while town gas was available, because it had carbon monoxide in it. And so Sylvia Plath dies by sticking her head into the oven, and she cared for her children. They were not harmed, but she stuck her head in the oven and closed up the door, and died that way. And it was a very common way to do it in Great Britain at the time. And you would think that when town gas went away, this is the common perception, that people who are at the end of their ropes and are going to kill themselves will find another way to kill themselves. But it simply wasn't true. Town gas went away in Great Britain and was throughout the 60s replaced with natural gas, as they found a big reserve in the sea, in the North Sea. and the rate of suicide just crashes. And then he brings up another example of excuse me, I didn't buy a drink at all because I was trying not to have the hiccups, and now my throat is all wonky, of course, because Topo Chico, right? Anyway, but he talks about the Golden Gate Bridge, and how it was a source of death by suicide, many deaths by suicide, and there was this movement to put up some sort of netting to keep people from killing themselves there, and it was met with big time resistance in San Francisco. People they would offer it up to the public for opinion, and pretty much the only people that would write in favor of it was people whose lives had been touched by suicide. And everybody else would write in and say, things like, if somebody wanted to kill themselves by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, they would just walk to the North Tower and shoot themselves. Or, I could see somebody this is a sort of ignorant thing that people would say, I could see somebody out of frustration that they couldn't kill themselves shooting somebody else, right? Or, again, the more generalized, if somebody wants to find a way to kill themselves, they're gonna do it some other way. And it didn't ever take place until recently, and the Golden Gate Bridge has been there for a while. Meanwhile, the concerns are, it's going to cost a lot of money. Well, they put up pedestrian borders to keep bicyclists safe, which was at large cost to the city, but not a single bicycler had been killed by a car. They put up a median between the north and southbound lanes, where that wasn't really a problem, but it was in the interest of public safety. But there was this big backlash against the idea of spending any money at all at putting suicide prevention nets on the Golden Gate Bridge, because people thought it was purposeless. And he makes this argument about coupling, the fact that our behaviors are coupled. So if somebody was going to kill themselves by suicide via town gas, it was the easiest, painless, most painless way to do it. But when that went away, the people who would have committed suicide in that situation didn't, because their feelings were coupled to an easy way to do it. And so just statistically, it drops right off. The same is true with the Golden Gate Bridge. He followed up, there's somebody who wrote a book called, I think, The Final Leap. And he follows up with 500 some people who were going to attempt suicide at the Golden Gate Bridge, but were kept from it for some reason. Somebody grabbed them, the police came, something happened that resulted in their not being able to jump. And you know how many people ended up committing suicide at a later date? 23 or 25. It's like 5% of the people who were going to commit suicide in this way but were prevented went on to do it. So he's making this strong argument that these feelings of desperation and this one available means were so closely coupled that to remove one of them is to disrupt the entire pattern, right? To disrupt the disruptive patterns in our lives. And I was thinking about, like, I wonder if this is true with those patterns of broken relationship and the ways that we sort of sabotage ourselves in relationship with one another. I wonder if there are ways that our ongoing feelings of animosity or misunderstanding are coupled with another sort of another sort of broken pattern in our lives. I also was thinking about this, like, what is the deal with the fact that we had that terrible shooting in Atlanta last week, and then we've had another one, another mass shooting in Denver just yesterday. Like, what is happening that is situational, that it feels like we spent a year without many instances of mass shootings, and now as we move back into something that looks more normal, we are having more and more of them. Something is happening here. But it's an opportunity for us, I think, to reflect upon the things that propel us into misunderstanding, the things that propel us into anger, the things that propel us into friction and tension with one another. What are we doing that is coupled with our senses of justice or righteousness, or just what it means to be a good human, right? Like, what are we doing? What can we do to disrupt those disruptive patterns? I don't know. All I'm saying is that it is something that I'm going to think about. I wonder, I think it's a big ball of wax, but I know that media has something to do with it. I know the way that we are isolated in our silos has something to do with it. I know that power relationships have something to do with it, and politics in that way, in the way that the demonization of the other side. But, like, how do we disrupt that pattern, right? How can we decouple ourselves from that, so that we engage in less conflict with one another? God help us. Woe to the world because of stumbling blocks, Jesus says. But at the same time, I do believe that there is a way to navigate around those stumbling blocks. And I think that is both corporate, how we engage in the world together, and individual. Because I do deeply believe that God is in the work and in the business of, like, individual transformation. that the Spirit of God is at work in you in particular and in the systems of this world. So, gosh, grace and peace, my friends. And I pray that you would give yourself to this work of reflection on the ways that our steps are stumbly. But there's a reason for that. And it's not just that you're bad, and it's not just that the world's bad, but there are things in place that we can disrupt for the sake of Christ. Turn over some tables in the temple, if you will. Anyway, grace and peace to you. We'll see you on Thursday, because I've got this week's lunchtime or Thursday Lectio. So, adios.